In this video, we're going to talk about syntax. Syntax is the study of rules governing the way that words are combined to form phrases, clauses, or sentences. So it's the way that we put words together as we begin to make longer utterances of speech or of text. Syntax is the most popular area of study for English linguists because English relies so heavily on word order to create meaning. So for example, consider the sentence, Jane ate the chicken. That sentence has a completely different meaning if we change the order of the words. The chicken ate Jane. Not all languages work like that. Other languages might privilege morphology or adding prefixes and suffixes to change meaning. So this is something that is important to know about the English language, and also can be an area that is especially important when we're working with multilingual learners. And so much of what's been researched and studied in terms of syntax has been trying to understand how different parts of sentences fit together, what the possibilities are for combining these different pieces to make phrases, clauses, and sentences. Here you see an example of a sentence that's been analyzed by its constituent structure. So looking at the noun phrase, the verb, and then the prepositional phrase that comprise this sentence, and then its constituent, its different parts. The cat sat on the mat. So syntax has a lot to do with word order. It's interesting sometimes to think about some of the ways that we engage with syntax without even really realizing that we're doing it. I find this example to be really telling, as it's something I didn't think about until I started studying linguistics. So adjective order is something in English that does have a rule-based, patterned, and systematic way that we engage it. So adjectives usually follow this order when we're including adjectives to describe something in a sentence. General opinion, specific opinion, size, shape, age, color, nationality, material. So we usually say something general before something specific, like nice, tasty soup, a lovely, intelligent animal. But I think some of the examples here that are a little bit more interesting, and that again aren't probably something that you've given a lot of thought to, are why we would say a nice red dress as opposed to a red nice dress, a silly old man as opposed to an old silly man, those horrible yellow curtains. Obviously, those would not fit elsewhere, but even those yellow horrible curtains. So meaning is made through the way that we put words together, and even without realizing it, you may, in your speaking and writing, be following certain systematic ways of putting words together in English without even realizing that you're doing it. All right, so let's transition then to thinking about how this impacts second language acquisition and second language learners. So certainly a challenge of English is the complexity of phrases and clauses that pack information into a sentence. Because so much meaning is packed in through word order, and because the clauses can become so complex, it can be really difficult for second language learners to tease out what is actually being said in the sentence. So consider this sentence. The little boy from next door fed the cat without a tail. So a lot happening here. The simplest sentence, or the skeleton sentence, is the boy fed the cat, right? Or maybe we keep the adjective in there, the little boy fed the cat. But adding in these prepositional phrases add description and packs in more information. Now we know it's the cat without a tail. We know which boy we're talking about, the boy from next door. But for someone who's learning English as a new language, this sentence could be overwhelming to navigate, because it can be easy to lose track of the subject, the object, and the verb in this sentence. It's also true that rules for sentence making differ across languages. So that's a challenge when learning English, or if you're an English speaker learning another language, understanding how sentences are made in that language. And so some ways to address that challenge, or address these challenges. One is to start to learn about the similarities and differences between languages with regards to syntax, and to start to make those more explicit for students so that they can more clearly identify those differences and employ them when they're using their new language. So to give you some examples between Spanish and English. In Spanish, and this is a similar example that was used in Wright's chapter, very commonly adjectives follow nouns in Spanish, whereas in English, typically the adjective comes before the noun. So la casa azul es grande, in English would be the blue house is big. So azul, which is blue, comes after the word casa in Spanish, but blue comes before the word house in English. So even just understanding that that's a common difference would help a child be able to more readily identify that. This is another challenge that Spanish speakers sometimes face when they're learning English. Possessives in Spanish are not indicated with apostrophe S as they are in English. So if you're trying to say your grandmother's house, you would say la casa de mi abuela. So the house of my grandmother. And so sometimes when I work with Spanish speakers who are learning English, I'll hear them use that construction because they're translating what they would say in Spanish into English rather than my grandmother's house. So kind of beginning to identify these differences between the languages with regard to syntax can help students more readily make progress towards mastering the new language. And that is it for syntax.